I forget. He was due to arrive at 5. He called me at 5 and said hadn't taken off yet. He called again at 6:30 and said still hadn't taken off.
We won't see him tonight.
And I said, well,
Any place.
and when you get here, it's not going to be too good, so I don't think he'll be here tonight. He sent an email to all of you saying that he wanted to do the agenda backwards, so that he wanted to discuss the budget first,
Yeah.
and then the committee reports, and if we get to minutes, which is highly unlikely, we do the minutes. And he actually even sent me a sheet telling me what he intended to do tonight and asked me to follow it, so I will. The goal tonight is to determine what number, what dollar figure we want to give to Peter Holland and Tom Younger to prepare budgets to meet in preparation for a discussion that will be held in 2 weeks, which would be, in essence, the, quotes, no override budget. Whether or not there is an override, there still needs to be a budget that explains to people what happens if an override fails. So there's no supposition here, number one, that there will not be an override, or there is no supposition that an override would not pass. But the question is, people have to prepare a budget to show what the budget would look like, given the available money. So he would like us to discuss 3 things. The first will be additional revenues, and that would be Tom and Barbara, if there are any. The second would be the school-town split, and last week Phil passed out a sheet showing the 08 split, and with a suggestion that that be the split that we follow this year. The third, which I think really should probably be the second, is what we do with free cash. He wanted us to discuss the free cash, and that was really our homework assignment for the week. And the final one was to discuss the amount that we wanted to contribute to the OPEB, if any. So those are the 4 things we'll do. So the easiest one should be additional revenues, if any. And Tom and Barbara, are you aware of any changes in the revenue picture?
I'm not aware. There was only one suggestion that would require some meeting with the Board of Assessors. I don't know if that's been followed through or not, but that was the only thing I could come up with at all.
And the only other thing which we'll be addressing with the assessors is we're a little more secure, I believe, on the lottery aid this year with the House budget basically stating that they would, match the lottery aid and not put it through as far as part of the casinos. So even though we still were considering that we're still going to get the lottery aid, we're more sure of it now than it was previously, but that does not affect our revenue account at this point.
And has the meeting with the assessors taken place?
No, because we'll be doing that probably within the next week and a half, 2 weeks on that.
Okay, can you see that it's done before that?
Oh, it'll be done before the next meeting.
Because 2 weeks from tonight will be our next
Right.
meeting.
No, it'll be done
So
before then,
I just want to make sure
yes.
that it's done by then.
Yes.
Okay.
Concerning the assessors, when they were here, it seemed pretty clear to me that they were only going to have $350,000 to $400,000 out of the overlay account that they were going to have to pay out, about $200 in statutory abatements and $150 or so in others beyond that. And for them to just arbitrarily put $800,000 in the overlay account does not make sense to me. I mean, I think that would come down to $400,000.
Yes, Barbara.
It's actually statutorily, they have full rights to decide exactly what's going to be.
I understand where the decision is, but I have certainly got the position to criticize that position, and I'm doing it.
Jim, yes.
I forget whether when we were thinking about budgets for the forthcoming year, we were thinking about building permit fees or not. If we were, McLean is going very slow along the committee. I don't think we were, but one time they were talking as if they were going to get going on the multiple residence building.
Right. So you're saying if in the revenue budget they had, do you know, Barbara, offhand, if you included a,
I didn't boost it, did not boost up the revenues for next year. I left it pretty level, but we've been coming a little bit over on our building permit, so when I keep a budget level, it means that it will be lower than what we actually
Well,
receive.
I think Barbara's probably answered my question, Pat, but we did not make any irretrievable assumptions.
Well, I don't think they're going to break ground at the senior center. That's the big one.
Yeah, I agree. At one point, they were telling us they're going.
I don't think they're ready to do it.
I agree.
Licenses.
This is the Freedom Conference.
I'm seeing it
Yeah.
saying licenses, but I'm only seeing what the recap sheet showed, I'm not seeing what we budgeted in there.
I don't think we did, Pat.
I could have done it by total.
Okay. Total licenses is flat.
Okay, well, then that gets rid of my
So
concern.
that looks like 550 is what was on the, for the 08, and 550 is next year. And the building part of that was 458 for 08.
We'd be lucky to get that much.
So
I
you're
suspect.
saying it might not even be
Yeah,
458.
that's what I'm saying.
Tom, could you check with Gwen in the next week also and just see if, I'm at the very last tab,
Okay.
and just see if the building licenses is still a good figure. If the 08 figure is a good figure for 09.
Yeah, isn't it down 100,000 from the budget of the previous year? Or am I looking at an old sheet here? I thought it was budgeted at 650 last year and 550 this year.
Should we be looking at 104, is that?
Am I looking at one of the older ones?
The actual for 07 was 617,
Yeah, but the budget was
and
650.
the budget for 08 was
Yeah.
450. So we already decreased it by 150 for 08.
That's what I'm saying, it was down from the budget.
It was down from the previous year,
Thank you.
but that also could be the decrease in housing.
Yeah.
You know, the other permits, so I think we should just check Mark.
No,
Two questions, actually. One is on the House budget bill, any word on Chapter 70 funds and where that might end up? Is there going to be an increase to the town? Do we have any idea?
What
The same as we're planning.
Same as we're planning?
Yeah.
Okay. And then just to follow up on Walter's point on the overlay account, what was our experience, or what will be our experience in '08? What has it been in terms of abatements? And I know they have full well within their rights to determine the reserve that they should provide, but
When they came to us a month ago, they said abatements were running at around 135,000, and that
I'm sorry, I missed that meeting, so I
the
apologize.
other one,
The statutories were 200. So
Were
that's
200,000.
335.
the exemptions.
That's the
that were
08
for
experience.
07 are the figures they
07,
had.
okay, excuse me.
The exemptions are pretty standard. I mean, you're not going to move them one way or the
Right.
other.
What did they hold back last year?
800?
They routinely look at they put 800 a year into their overlay, and then they release what they think they can every year.
What are they releasing this year? 600, we figured?
They said 450 they would release this year.
That's what they told us at that meeting. Tom, the other issue I'd like you to ask them is, if you recall the money that we put in the overlay a year ago?
The additional.
Yes. That money was not available until last July 1st, but once it was certified, it should then have been available, and there should be no reason why they would be holding that. So perhaps they could at least give us that.
Well, theoretically, you can get a double hit. You get less put in this year and back from what they overheld the year before. And that's the kind of thing you need to get this budget balanced.
Yeah.
Just to recap, their point for not being, their rationale for not being aggressive was that if housing prices continue to fall, people will come in, they will look for abatements, and it's very hard to say no when there's been a highly comparable market transaction. It says, my assessment is wrong. That was their rationale for being conservative.
All they're going to do is anticipate it and lower everybody's assessment a little bit and increase the rate, and then they have no problem.
Well, that's what they've done.
They did that.
But then they should have no problem.
In fact, they did.
They actually did that.
They did do that, except for mine. We're not going there.
They're after you, anyway.
Well, so we will see what happens with the assessors within the next
Who
2
is taking to talking with the assessor?
I'm talking, if you want to meet with
Tom
me,
to,
if you want to meet too, that's fine also.
Let's see if we can do that.
Okay.
We need some help with it.
because when we met with them, that was at least now a month ago, correct? Very close.
I can go where you want me to go.
And
I want to come out in one piece, Walter.
They're all old friends. I don't mind telling them off. Don't worry.
you already did, Walter.
It's a two-pronged approach, Walter. You go in after they...
I'll be the bad cop,
Yeah,
right?
right.
Okay, so that takes care of revenues. Has anybody else found any revenues?
If I might,
Yes.
does anybody, we've heard Walter say that he thinks the amount should be 400,000. Does anybody else have any, what a reasonable request is from the Warrant Committee? I mean, I'd like to, in what basis we're using for that?
The basis of their abatements last year, plus their statutory abatements. I mean, they haven't got any new controversial assessment that I know of. I mean, they're dealing mostly with single-family homes. I mean, it isn't like O'Neill's going to come in for an abatement.
What did we have in the budget for going into the overlay, and what did we have for them paying us? What were those two numbers?
Going into the overlay,
Yeah, it was 800,000 that they wanted to hold back, right?
you mean for FY09?
For FY09?
Yeah.
800,000, correct.
Okay. And
And-
what did they
They wanted to release
release?
not from FY07 overlay
Yeah,
or 06, but from 05 overlay, I believe.
Yeah.
450,000.
450.
I may have the year wrong, but it's 450,
Okay, it's what they wanted to release.
correct.
And we contend that there's also money that they can release from FY07, right? FY08.
07.
Right.
It's recap, right? The 06.
No, it's FY07.
FY07, yeah,
So
FY07.
FY07, and what is that amount? Does anybody remember? Was 280 or something?
It was
No.
about 137, but there's more to it than that, so we can talk offline about
Okay, so that's another plus something.
Right. So one of the questions was, could they release money earlier from the previous years than they have historically been doing? Because at a certain point, the door is shut on filing for abatement, so they have to know what they have for filings. And even
Right.
as conservative as they want to be, they've got to know there's a certain amount of money that they're not going to need to deal with in that fiscal year, regardless of what they have to deal with in 07 or 08.
But if I just did simple math, if they've held back 800,000 in FY04 and in FY05, and they're giving us 450,000 back from FY05, that means they overheld $350,000 in FY05.
No, because at least 333,000 was what they had to use.
But they overestimated.
But they overestimated by
800,
350,000.
they overheld $450,000. They put
Oh, okay.
350.
Well, if they put in 800,000, and out of that they spent 350,
Right. They
and
gave
they're
us
releasing
450.
400, there's only about $100,000 left in that.
No,
in that
but I'm
number.
saying they overestimated by
Right.
As a
$400,000.
general principle,
So
year
are
after year
they,
after year.
the basic question is, are they traditionally year in and year out overestimating by $400,000?
It
And you're
appeared that
waiting
way.
3 years to get it back.
And we wait 3 years to get it back.
It appeared that way from the discussion we had with them. We had a very lengthy discussion with them while you were away. And it did appear that they were being conservative in what they were holding. And the question was, could they be less conservative as that year passes and they know what they have? Okay? Done with revenues?
Well,
I'm sorry, Roy? And then
One quick question on the line for alarm fees and fire fees, which in '07 was about $150,000, and it looks like it was a lot less in '08.
What's the reason for that?
May I
Yes, please.
We went to a new accounting system, and we realigned some revenue, so you see some went up, some went down. It was just, we went by the Mass General Law language and stating what's a license, what's a fee, and that's how we divided it. And it was just a realignment according to the Mass General Law, that's all. But it wasn't any change in it overall.
But in total, I guess for the whole block of line items there, it was 240,000 in '07 and then only 198,000 in '08.
I would have to research the whole thing.
Correct, but what Barbara also said is the licenses changed, and if you look at police licenses, it went from the next page. If you flip that page, on the back of the page you're looking at, there's licenses. And what she's saying is that in the codifying, some fees went to licenses and some licenses went to fees.
But
And so the delta is,
net, maybe nothing changed?
that's what Barbara's
That's
saying.
what she said, correct.
I mean, we would have to double check the figures, but just looking at the police,
And the license.
licenses went from 2,000 to 35,000.
Okay.
So that may take care of what you were talking about, and we picked up town clerk licenses. So there may be, this was the first year of the new system, so we have a lot of changes like that. Yes, Mark?
That was the fee question, so it's been
Oh, it's been
discussed.
answered, okay.
Yep.
Yep,
The 458, which is the building licenses for FY08, that's the estimate as of today is what those are going to be?
It would probably come in higher than that for the current year, but I did not increase the estimate for next year. I tend to be very conservative, so it's going to be higher than that for FY08. Actual numbers.
And what number are we using for FY09?
I just, at this point, I'm looking at just the bottom line and did not do it by section. I kept.
Okay, so there might, so there might be something we could do.
I wouldn't want to overestimate based on the economy and the sale of things up at McLean.
My point,
yeah, Jim's.
Mr. Frenzy, was that may well be lower, not higher.
But it could also be,
Could be, but
And which is
I don't
why
think
I asked
anybody
Tom.
thinks McLean is going to,
Right.
the department, or the LD.
the other housing
McLean
won't
is-
started, but they're continuing to develop in the other area, right? If we can call the Northland development.
Slowly, yes.
Slowly.
Yeah, so that, I mean, that's continuing the pace it's been on, so.
Well, we may get to 450.
No, it's not at the pace it's
That's the
at.
point.
Significantly slower. They're building, but they're not selling.
I don't care if they're selling, I don't care if they're building.
Well, they're not building
They're
more
not,
now
right.
because they haven't sold what they've built. So that was one of the things that Glenn had said, but Barbara and Tom would just check that figure with Glenn and be comfortable with that figure. That was the
Just to
Yes.
check in on one more revenue source, and that's
Yep.
with the treasurer, whether there's been any change since the last time we spoke.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's what I thought.
Rates are falling.
The answer was going to be,
Yeah.
I've been watching the news, maybe I missed something.
We
Missed it.
did get
Okay.
an adjustment in the interest on investments about 3 weeks ago, which was an adjustment down.
Right, which
And-
increased
That's reflected.
in
But-
the gross dollars.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Okay. Nothing more on revenues. Let's move to,
So what number are we then using?
Not really here because there's an adjustment.
yeah. There's a sheet that was in all the packets
Right.
tonight.
Yeah.
This one?
Just puts it in. For those of you who are new to the budget process, you have the cuts and add sheets that was in your packet tonight, in your folder. The left side is revenues, and there are adjustments made to that. These are usually off the original budget, so what's in your white book. And then this running list just continues through the budget season. And on the right side of the page are the expenditures. And where it says adjustments, some go up, some go down. The biggest one that you're seeing, which we have right now, is street lighting. And due to a decision by the light board, I think 2 weeks ago, the municipal rates are going up to reflect what the municipal offices are actually using. And so that is an add of $215,000 over what's in the budget book. And that's street lighting only, right, Barbara? Now, you have not, and then...
That's a standard rate increase. We didn't change anything other than to impact the rate increases we impacted in to begin with. We didn't change the rate at which we're charging.
Based on the rate chart that was given to me, based on page 16, it went up 155% from what was paid out in last calendar year. So the total rate increase between last calendar year and calendar year 2008, which impacts 2009, is 155%. Not 55%, but 155%.
Of which 50% you had already included in the budget.
I'd already built in 50%.
Correct. And below that, again, is building services electricity, which is all the town building electricity. And we don't have the new figure yet from the school department, but there will be one. As of yesterday, Jim had not figured that number out. So there will be a new figure also from the school department, which will reflect the electricity cost in the school buildings. Everybody figured 50%. The increase is significantly high. Right.
We just took out the additions.
Okay, so,
I'm not comfortable with that, Barbara. From the rate hearing that we had with the electric light department, they were not talking about raising the rates. We're not changing the breakdown, which they wanted to, but we didn't do that. They wanted to charge the municipality the same rates they charge everybody else.
This is just street lighting. It was not that rate increase for municipal building. It was just street lighting.
and then below it is the municipal rate increase for building.
Correct, and that was closer to...
So if street lighting is going up $215,000,
Correct.
what's it going up to?
571.
571.
It's right there. The new total is right on the same line.
Oh, I'm sorry. Now, last year, we made a decision to cut off half the lights, but we never did it because we didn't have to.
Correct.
So that's still a decision that's available to us
Yes.
I would assume so.
at this rate.
Absolutely, Angela.
Can I ask a question? Weren't some of the lights,
We said we would.
Definite-
We never did it.
We
never
didn't do
implemented
We didn't add any new lights.
okay, but there is a diminution of lighting in the town over the last,
We never did it.
Yeah, because we were able to budget it.
We were able to budget it without doing
I
it.
think just on your street.
I think, in a couple of streets in my neighborhood, quite honestly. It seems very much dimmer.
Yeah. Not replacing bulbs.
I'm shocked to hear that.
So street lighting, the estimated 08 is $280,000. Does that make sense for you?
Street lighting, 08?
Yep.
Yes, correct.
280.
What's the 571?
That's 09.
Gotcha.
Okay?
What was the weight again?
280, 236.
Yeah.
But Arlington built in some rate increase in that, so we built it on basic usage.
Right. Okay. Are we done with that? So Barbara, the new revenue figure is, have you got something that compares to what you did for us last week? This
I
sheet.
didn't do that, that one, I didn't change
Okay.
that. No.
We need, so in order to figure out what the revenue is minus the non-discretionary items.
Well, it's,
Do you want the sheet?
it's about another...
I mean, your deficit comes to the same number, Pat.
$180,000 more added to the revenue. Oh, no, it doesn't, because That includes other things. I have to look at.
Okay.
Separately. I can't. Off the cuff, sorry.
Okay.
Does this adjustment assume that we're not putting the 500,000 in for post-employment help?
Yes, I do
It's on
want
the
you to
left.
answer it, because you prepared the sheet.
It's on the left-hand side.
Expenditure side of the budget was built on the premise that it was exactly level service, which included the expense for post-employment health.
Right.
But I was told to only put $800,000 for revenue from free cash, which I did. And Roe made the decision that because we had used $500,000 of revenue last year for free cash for OPEB, or the post-employment health, that we should be putting that in this year as well. So that's why I added it to this.
So it's an add and a subtract on the left-hand side. In other words, it's a wash.
I see the add, I don't see the subtract.
Subtract to something different.
question.
Free cash for post-employment health, and then, oh, I'm sorry, no, I don't see.
It just happens to be the same number.
Same
It's
number.
it's a
Right.
different
It's a different
subject.
item.
The adjustment is adjustment on revenue,
Right,
and the 800 is already in the 79.
yep.
If you go down to available funds and look at free cash,
1.3 total free cash.
it has, Barbara has available 1.673.
It was
So-
2.1.
2.9, so if you add back the 800,000 of free cash and the $500,000 for the employment health, post-employment health, that equals your 2.9.
2.9,
Right.
got it.
I'm sorry, put it faster.
Can you do that one more time?
Available funds, last group,
Free cash.
free cash was 2.9.
Yeah.
Right.
1.673 plus 500 plus 800
Equals 2.9.
equals 2.9.
If I might, the 800,000 is in the top line, original general fund, reflected there as free
Correct.
cash. That's already embedded in the 79.
Okay.
Yep.
The additional 500 is reflected below, under adjustments.
Yep,
And then where's the 1,673?
Down below, there's a reconciliation
Under
of...
the available
Free
funds.
cash available is 2.9, less 1.3, which means 1.6 is still available.
Okay.
And 1.3 is two pieces, 800 plus 500.
correct.
In other words, we've already, somebody's already decided that we would not make the 500,000 contribution to,
No, that's there.
It's there.
Total solid
It's already been assumed
It
there.
was taken off the top of the free cash.
It was assumed already.
in the appropriation line item, which is assumed on the right-hand side, not on the left, until later on. So it's always been in the appropriation because it's level from last year.
And it wasn't
That's what I was trying to reconcile.
taken out of the revenue.
Yeah.
Okay? All right. Moving on to free cash. Perfect place.
That's certain, Mr. Chairman, we have everybody on board in terms of the numbers?
I think so.
Okay.
I guess the number that I'm still driving at is what's the difference?
Okay.
What's the gap that we're trying to fill?
3.1, 3.97, right?
No, 3.1, and that's after everybody's made level.
That's bringing everybody down to a level service.
Right, correct.
I don't see how it can still be 3.1 if you've added the street lighting, and that's what I'm not understanding. How can the figure be the same figure we had last week?
There's a lot of things in here. There's a lot of different pieces. I'd have to check exactly the changes between that page and this. And last week. I'm sorry. I didn't think
If street lighting goes up to the extent that it's going to, I would assume you would cut the number of streetlights.
Well, that's a decision we've got to make. That's a decision we made last year and then didn't do it. Okay, maybe this year we'll have to do it.
But the thought is to try to get clear on the numbers first.
First, and then figure out where you
Before we
are.
start making those decisions, and that's what we're,
Attempting to do.
That's the number we're attempting to wrestle to the ground at the moment.
Right. It's going to be hard to come up with a dollar figure to give Peter Holland and Tom Younger if we don't know what dollar figure we're talking about. That's what I'm trying to say.
You want me to just,
Is it possible for you to look at this while we discuss free cash? Okay. And you have the sheet you gave us tonight. And we can have the discussion of free cash without that specific number, because we already know that whatever the figure is, it's higher than the amount that's in the free cash.
No matter what we do, if we fully exhaust it, we still have a deficit.
Correct. So the discussion on free cash, there are 3 or 4 pieces to the discussion on free cash. One of which is the discussion about the OPEB contribution, which may or may not be a separate conversation. One is how much money, if any, do people feel we should leave in the budget as a carryover to next year? Should we bring the free cash to 0? Should we leave an amount of money in there? And if so, what is that amount of money? And then the third question is, how does the Warrant Committee want to recommend the free cash be, that the Warrant Committee feels doesn't need to be left over, if any? How do we feel we need to spend that money? Should we put some of that money into the operating budget? Should we put all of that money into the operating budget? Should we use some of that money in operating and some of that money on one-time expenditures? Should we use all of the money on one-time expenditures? Last year we did the grouping. We did some one-time expenditures and we put an additional $1 million into the operating budget, which of course is creating part of the problem this year. So, Bill.
can I ask a question that's somewhat germane to this snow budget? We're going to be over after this.
We are over.
So where do we get the funds this year? I know we can, but where do we get the funds this year to pay for the free cash, that whatever additional money we spend for snow removal from now through the end of this fiscal year? Where do we get the money to pay for that?
The Warrant Committee Reserve Fund.
Reserve fund.
Okay, it comes out of the reserve fund, not out of the free cash.
It would come out of the reserve fund until there was no more money in the reserve fund, at which point we might have to go to town meeting to ask for some free cash, which we've done in the past. But remember that this year the reserve fund is healthier than it's been in past years because we returned
150,000.
150,000. So
So you've got an extra
550 is what we
150,000 in the
started with.
reserve fund, which should cover the snow removal.
As long as we don't have a February like we had in December, we should be all set.
I was just thinking last night we got through it. I guess my other concern about the snow budget in general, I know it's not the topic here, is that we always seem to be more under the snow budget than being on track with it. And I look at what we spent in '06 and what we're spending this year, and I look what the budget is for next year. And, I think we're fooling ourselves thinking that snow budget is correct.
Global warming is coming.
Yeah, thank you. Tell my snow blower that, will you?
We have increased the budget to reflect the cost of salt, to reflect the cost of some of the supplies. In the past couple of years, there have been adjustments made, and last year we didn't spend the snow budget.
No, but in '06, we went over.
We did go over, but
And
we had money.
we know we're over this year, so 2 of the last 3 years, we're over and we're over substantially.
Right, but it is the one account we are allowed by law to go over, and
Yeah,
not
no, I
be penalized.
understand that. I just hate sitting here looking at a 426 budget when we already spent.
And just remember, when you raise it, that's the number you have to stick with.
I don't understand.
So you can't go back down and still have the benefit of being able to overspend it. So you want to be conservative in that figure, because if you raise the figure this year,
I understand
then
what
you
you're
have to
saying,
use,
Cal.
that becomes your new floor.
And I think that's something that we don't need to talk about it now. I just think we're not budgeting snow correctly, is all I'm saying.
Okay.
And I think the numbers for the last 2 years show that last year.
Sorry.
I think she's right, though. We're stuck with
Yeah, oh yeah.
This is just for Bill. I think, I'm trying to recall, because I don't have it in front of me, we're either 14,000 over or 14,000 under near the end of January. But we keep track every month, we have an update.
I know. We're 14,000 under, to answer your question, and I'm sure with what we did yesterday, we're
Right.
well over
That was
that.
actually 2 snowstorms ago. The Sunday
Right,
yeah.
snowstorm a week ago
Yeah.
clearly ate up that 14.
Yeah, so we're well over that. And I understand what you're saying, but again, we've got to pay for it somewhere, whatever the overage is, and if we're going to keep
This year, we're okay.
Yeah.
Absent some major disaster between now and June, we are okay. Mark?
I have a general question and may not be able to answer it this evening. Free cash, most of free cash is generated by givebacks based on actual to budget. I mean, a lot of the free cash, givebacks from the departments, and I just wonder what has our experience been now 8 months into fiscal year 08 in terms of expenditures tracking against budget?
If you look at the quarterly report that you received last week in your folder, you've got the answer to that.
Okay.
Not that I have committed it all to memory yet.
Yeah.
We did get one last week.
She's
And-
good. She's good. Yeah, incredible.
This was as of, I'm looking at the date here, 12/31, so half a year.
Yeah, but I'm sorry.
And in some cases, we're running 50%, in some cases, we're running the high 40s. I'm looking at department totals, I'm not looking at each individual item. Debt and interest were down. That's an expenditure, so I don't know why that's down. But a lot of them we're tracking right, it's 50% of the year. The total operating expenditures is 40.8% right now.
I may certainly realize some of this is seasonal as well, so we may not be capturing all of these
Right.
expenditures.
We're certainly not capturing the snow
Right.
in that figure.
Good point.
And there's probably some other things that we're not hitting. And on the other hand, there's other things that we knock off 100% right at the very beginning. So,
Right.
you know,
And our revenue projections on investment income may be not as conservative as they need to be as well, as a consideration.
that
Okay,
could be.
That's helpful.
So the revenues are at 44%. The expenditures are at 40, yes.
Floyd, do you have any debt assumptions for this year in the budget?
Debt assumptions?
Yeah, it's the funding, it's the bonding of the senior center is one thing, right?
That would be, I have some in 09.
You've got that in 09, right? And hopefully in that case, the interest rates will be lower than we originally budgeted for. If we lose it on one end, we should gain it on the other, at least on the new debt.
Liz?
Right now, and this may change, but because of the concern about, Buffett notwithstanding, because of concern about the municipal, whether these municipal bonds are really as safe as they have been. Currently, we're taking it on both ends. The rate of return is declining, as Floyd's pointed out, but municipal interest rates are now closer to Treasury yields than they've ever been, because now municipal bonds are perceived by the market as carrying an element of risk. It's the perfect storm.
We don't need a bond insurer, we're AAA without it.
No, but just in general, municipal
Rates.
Municipal rates.
The rates are just
Rates
not,
gone.
No,
Not as-
that's,
not
you're
as safe
certainly
as they
correct,
used to
but
be.
our rates, even the AAA rates are uninsured are moving up.
okay.
Aren't you glad you brought that?
So, yes, go ahead.
Well, just in thinking about the use of free cash and anything that I read, I think discussion around this table is that you really don't want to use it to the extent possible within your recurring operating budget because it just exacerbates next year's issues. But when you look through the budget, there are a fair number of line items, at least the ones that I've seen, that are capital in nature, or seem to be capital outlays, which one could suggest are one-time expenditures. And just a consideration as a possible approach there with the use of more of the free cash that we're currently using. Those capital outlays are reflected in the expenditure line. To use that free cash for some of those capital outlays, if you will. And additionally, looking at those capital outlays to the extent possible and determining whether they're absolutely needed this year. I know the departments feel they are, but it's not part of the operating budget per se, although I guess if it's recurring in nature every year, for example, the police cruisers,
Right.
it's an operating issue. So I wrestle with what I consider to be one-time expenditure when you buy a new car, and whether that one-time expenditure is not a recurring one, and then the use of free cash for that.
So you're referring to the capital outlay line?
Yeah, lines in all of
Reinstituted in the budget last year?
Yes, that's correct.
And the reason we reinstituted it was because departments were hitting the capital budget for maintenance and very small capital items that were not legitimate expenditures for the capital budget.
Well, just one example, I mean, in the fire budget, there is, as the Public Safety Subcommittee knows, there is an expenditure of, I think it's $34,000 for EMS software and equipment. That's a one-time thing. They need to expend that in order to come into compliance with the reporting of ambulance incidents. I don't envision that occurring next year, although it's there, and it's $34,000. And so if you could use free cash for that, and I don't have the fire chief in front of us to ask whether that's a recurring expense, but it seemed to me in our discussion that was a one-time. And so I don't know how many of those items exist currently in the budget today that we could look at and feel more comfortable about expending more free cash for those and not really, I guess, building more into the ongoing recurring budget by adding personnel.
I assume we're into the use of the free cash discussion.
That's the discussion we're
Okay.
having.
And it would seem to me if we broke this down into pieces, whether we use the 2.9 number, the 1.6 number, whatever number we're going to end up using, there are a couple of pieces there that we know we have to deal with. And, what is, for example, the first question I'd ask is, what is the correct amount to be holding over? And as I remember from some of the stuff that you sent us, Barbara, it's a targeted amount that's suggested as a percentage of budget for holdover free cash. Can you?
Barbara's doing the
Barbara's
figuring.
working, she's
You
doing
got to
it.
concentrate on that.
Well, no, but it's an important number. Barbara?
I'm sorry,
Yeah, I'm
yes?
sorry, yeah. There is a target amount
tried
of
to
free
stop.
cash, of free cash that is suggested that a community hold, that they don't spend all of their free cash, but that there's some targeted amount that's suggested by the benchmark groups or the authorities that a community hold. What is that number, do you know?
I don't think they're talking about a dollar amount per se. They're talking about a reserve policy, and we had looked at a 10% reserve policy based on the prior year revenue. And 10% is a good number to go with. We have gone between 10 and, the last 3 years we've had 13%, 15%. One year we had 17%. I think it was 15% this past July 1st.
That we held over.
Well, reserve policy is made up, when you're looking at reserve.
More than free cash.
Right.
No.
It's way more than.
Yeah, but
it's
that's not the number I'm looking at. So you're saying that the suggestion is how much we should hold in reserve. And we have a policy that says we should not go below 10% without some extraordinary situation in reserves.
And
And free cash is part of that number.
in a way it is. It's made up of our unreserved fund balance, which is mostly free cash,
Yeah.
as well as the amount from the Kendall Fire, as well as your capital endowment fund.
I
So,
guess, let me ask the question this way. What would be the recommended amount of free cash that we should hold over from your perspective based on where you, we originally said we should hold over 800,000 last year. I think we held over 800,000 in free cash, right?
I believe we should have $1 million in hand at all times, not particularly for a percentage of free cash or anything else. And I know that some people will disagree with me, but for emergencies, for oil spills, for a disaster of any kind.
So if we held over 500,000, plus you had the 400,000 for reserve fund transfer, that gives you 900,000. That's close to $1 million.
Oh, I'm talking about $1 million. Reserve fund is really for smaller things during the years. I'm looking at more, and once you have your $1 million and decide you're going to keep it, it will sit there. it will be, once you've set aside the $1 million, it's not like it's going to, you have to raise it.
Look, let me ask the question this way. If you were to come up to this group and make a recommendation on how much that free cash number should be, in terms of carryover, in terms of reserve, in terms of whatever you want to call it,
$1 million.
your recommendation would be $1 million?
Correct.
Okay. All right. And we were talking in terms of, at least last week, in terms of that number going down as low as 500,000. It could go down to zero. There's nothing to keep it from going down to zero. And if it went down to zero, we still would not put into jeopardy our reserve fund, total reserve fund number.
Correct.
Okay? So we could go down to zero and still meet our total reserve fund number as far as reserves are concerned.
The reserve calculation is only done on July 1st of every year. So you can spend all the free cash this year, and next July 1st, there'll be a new reserve calculation. You're not going to change that, the current percentage. We're going to go to a bond issue, and we'll use we'll use what we had for last July 1st. We will not be doing a revision mid-year. So if you want to spend all of it, that's up to you. I'd like to see at least $1 million in there come next July 1st. And if we had an emergency in the middle, I'd kind of like to have some cash around, although we could always use the Kendall. Don't shoot me.
Okay. Mike?
Do we have, I'm trying to remember, I think we've seen the sheet, how much we've carried over in the last 10 years, year by year? To Angela's question. I mean, part of what I'm trying to remember and I don't. Does anybody?
There was a calculation, Mike, we had.
We did.
A summary of.
We did have it. And
I know.
remember, the free cash has been all over the place, too, and that has made a major difference.
Well, that's what I'm sorry.
Fewer than
yes.
10 years ago, free cash was in the $150,000.
Right.
Is what we got in a year. And that's been within 10 years, because you and I have both been on the Warrant Committee
Right.
for that one and Ralph. So it clearly has been within the 10 years. In the past few years, free cash has been very healthy. I thought we held over 500 last year. Maybe it was 8. I thought it was 5.
I mean, the number I was going to suggest was, for this purpose, was 500,000.
That's where I was.
Not because it's a scientific recommendation. This is all in art form, but that was the number I was going to suggest.
Right. Walter and then Mark.
I'm just trying to look at it from the big picture point of view. And from the big picture point of view, if you want to put a roads override on, you shouldn't have an operational override, which means you got to balance this somehow or other. And the more you can cut these various reserves of everybody that's always ultra-conservative, the closer you're going to narrow that gap and the less pain there's going to be. And I'm kind of in favor of that.
That's what I'm saying, too.
Mark and then John.
I'm not suggesting this is gospel, but I would like to do research on these things. And the Department of Revenue, on their website, they have a discussion of free cash, and this is less conservative than the numbers we're talking about here. They say that under sound financial policies, a community would strive to generate free cash in an amount equal to 3 to 5% of its annual budget. It goes on to discuss the use of free cash.
That's the number I was looking for.
Excuse me?
That's the number I was
Yeah.
looking for.
Prudent use of free cash would be to fund one-time expenditures, a capital purpose, or to replenish other reserves. And so I think if you take 5% of our current budget, it means less than $500,000. Not to suggest that's the number we should go to. I'm just stating something that I've read by the DOR that I'm sure has a lot more information than we might on what other communities may do throughout the Commonwealth.
John,
I just want to
and
agree
then
with
Liz.
what Walter said about, if we're going for a roads override or operating override, we're going to draw all those down just so we don't have all those in the books. It also makes me think of what we did for the school committee's revolving accounts. Like, well, we had all this, what we consider kind of reserves just sitting there, and like, how can we be asking for more money if these are just sitting there? So we keep those down to very low over the last 3 years. The same thing applies for this amount of free cash.
I'm not disagreeing at all. The question for me is, do we spend it on one-time expenses or do we spend it on operating, not do we
That's a
spend...
charade.
That's a different...
No, it isn't. Roy and then Peg?
So, I mean, free cash is kind of the rainy day fund.
And if it's, suppose free cash is exhausted and something comes up, then what? Does that mean going to another reserve, or?
We have our reserves, which are the Cable Endowment Fund, and we have some money in what is currently still labeled the Kendall Insurance Fund. When we settled the insurance on the Kendall school fire, that money came back to the general fund and is in an account called the Kendall Insurance Fund. And we have those two accounts, and those are part of what makes up this reserve policy that the town has to have 10% of the previous year's operating budget in reserve. So the Cable Endowment Fund requires a 2/3 vote of town meeting to take money out, and it is restricted. There are restricted uses for that. The insurance fund is not restricted. That can be used for any lawful purpose. So if there were a real huge emergency, we do have backup reserves. Other than, I recognize people have their hands up.
I just wanted to add something.
Sure.
All right, plus we've got the Woodfall vote sale, which is going to happen in the next 12 months, hopefully. And that's, who knows what, but, 5 house lots in Belmont, bordering Belmont Country Club are going to be more than $90,000 each.
Is that restricted in its use, Tom?
It would be capital use or pay down, you can't use it for operating.
Correct, okay.
Yeah, but
That's why I
it
have-
can't go into the reserves.
Yes,
It can go into the capital endowment fund.
It can go into the capital endowment
We can do
fund,
lots
right.
of things with it and put it in reserve.
Jim?
I'm going to move that we recommend that free cash be allowed to go down to 500,000.
I'll second that.
Okay, is there, Peg, I'm sorry, I
No, that's
skipped
okay,
you when I
that's all
said
right, no,
I'd
that's all right.
recognize you next.
I'm
Discussion.
Yes, still discussion. Respect Barbara's recommendation for the 1 million, but I'm also mindful of the roads override, and I think we really need to keep that very much, front and center. Somebody mentioned there's going to be less pain, and I see the only route to less pain is if we do reduce the amount of the free cash, but seriously use it for non-recurring expenses.
Otherwise. Okay. So, now, to the motion on the floor, which is the $500,000, keeping the $500,000 of free cash as a carryover. Is there further discussion on that particular issue? John?
If someone would want it lower, would I vote yes or no for that?
I guess you'd vote no.
Or vote to amend the motion that's on the floor. Right? I mean, I guess you could have
Or
a
you could amend the motion.
secondary motion to amend the existing motion. If you care to do so, you can do that.
Well, if you're going to do it logically, start low, and if you lose that one, then go up.
We might want to vote on the motion.
Well, okay,
Well,
let me
no,
just
I
make sure, John doesn't want to amend the motion that's on the floor.
I'd like to propose an amendment to that. I move that we amend that to be 250,000.
I'll second that.
Okay. Is there any discussion on having it go to 250,000?
Move the question.
Well, then you have to take a vote on that.
Now I have to vote on moving the question.
That's correct.
So, all in favor of moving the question?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay. Now we're back to the question of the amendment, lowering it to $250,000. All in favor of carrying over only $250,000 in free cash, please raise your hand. I believe I'm seeing 3. And you have the names?
I do.
Okay. Opposed?
You better start going up, John.
If you have the 3, you should be all set. 3 and 10, are there any abstentions? Okay.
Defeated.
Now we're back to, yes, that motion was defeated. Now we're back to the main motion, which was $500,000 carryover of free cash. Is there any discussion on that? Any further discussion on that? Yes, Roy.
When there have been drawdowns on free cash in the past, what's been the biggest hit in 1 year in recent history?
The Burbank oil spill and snow.
And in total, how much was that?
Burbank oil spill was $1.5 million. We didn't have it all in free cash.
We didn't take it all in a free cash.
We took it from, we actually took some from the departments in the middle of the year. It was
Disaster.
Very bad.
It was impossible to come up with the money in no time.
Yeah, so this is, I mean, Barbara came up with that million for a
Well,
reason.
that's the worst case. What's the second worst case then?
Snow.
Which,
Snow can go high. It depends upon if there's been a rate on the reserve fund for other things. Sometimes there is. There are years when we have 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 requests from the reserve fund, and when it comes time to reimburse for snow, the money isn't there. What we very often do, Roy, is at the annual town meeting in April, we'll call a special meeting within the annual town meeting and ask departments at that point to go through their budgets, and we reappropriate money that was appropriated for the departments to be reappropriated usually into the reserve fund. And that money then does not become free cash in June 1st for the following year because it's expended in that year. And we've done that a few times. So we have a variety of ways of dealing. Well, we did that with the Burbank. Barbara, did you have a hand up? No. Okay.
Are there any anticipated at the moment call for reserve fund usage?
Tom?
If we're talking major numbers, it would probably be, well, I don't mean major, I don't mean six-figure numbers, but the Homer stairs is a possibility.
Yes,
that would
there
be
is. That is a six-figure. No. Yes, it
That's, okay, because that was still under discussion as of
No,
today.
it's
Okay, you still believe
six
six. But I'd say low six figures, not.
correct.
And how soon would that be?
We're in discussion that probably within a month, I'd say.
Jim, Liz, and then Mike.
Move the question.
Shouldn't have recognized you. Okay, all in favor of moving the question?
Aye.
Anyone opposed?
Opposed.
Opposed. Opposed.
Post.
Okay, I need to take a vote because,
Yep.
so those in favor of moving the question, please raise your hand. 2, 4, 5. And those opposed? 2, 4, 6, 7. Okay, so we're not moving the question. Liz, were you next and then?
Yeah, just again on the under, I think as we walked into the second town meeting last year, the school department came and said, there's a crack, we don't know how much it's going to cost, but essentially all of the, what was it, 300? 150, which was an absolutely last minute, entirely unexpected draw on the reserves.
And it was also 2 weeks left in the fiscal
Right.
year.
Yes, but just the point that there was absolutely no sense at all that was coming.
Right.
A parent sees a crack and it turns out to be something that might be very serious, and that's why they call them reserves.
Right.
Yeah.
Mike?
Just wanted to say that I think 500,000 is a responsible amount to carry over. At the same time, I think it's imperative that we try to close this gap so that if we don't have an override in order to support the roads override, similar to what Walter was saying, that we take as much as we can out of free cash and still be responsible. So I'm supportive of the 500.
Okay. Anything, we're back to the main motion, which is $500,000 in free cash being held over to the next year. Is there any other discussion? Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, all in favor of leaving $500,000 in free cash as a carryover, please say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Is anyone opposed? Is anyone abstaining? Okay, that's a vote. Now, that leaves us $2.4 million in free cash, of which we have already assumed $800,000 as being in the operating budget. Am I correct, Barb?
Oh, yes.
Okay, I saw your face, so I just wanted to make sure I was... Well, I'm not using it yet, so we want it back. Okay, so
1.933.
minus 5 is 2.5 is what?
The deficit is 1.933885 now. If I did my math right.
Wait a minute.
You don't mean the deficit, you mean the amount of free cash.
We're trying to get the number additional free cash that can be used as a result of the vote.
1173112.
That's not the figure either.
No.
2.9 minus 800,000.
It's 1.1.
Which leaves you with 1.6.
Thank you, that's what I thought it was. I was getting confused with this 1.5.
Right.
Okay.
That's right, yeah, that's right.
Taking away 1.3508.
What are we saying is the difference is, Pat, now the shortfall, that was 3.1 on the sheet we've got here? What are we?
Barbara's still working on that. Okay.
Wait, one second. Before, all right,
2.9 in free cash.
yep,
Right.
we've already committed,
800,000 is already committed to the operating budget.
right,
And 500,000 is committed to being held over.
Right.
Which is 1.3.
all right.
From 2.9 leaves us
Right.
1.6. We all got our basic math together.
Right.
Done without calculators. Okay, now the discussion is, how would people suggest that we consider spending that $1.6 million?
What about
No, it's not 1.6. No, it's not 1.6.
We've got the,
You have to, aren't you carrying over 500?
for health insurance.
I did carry over 500.
No, the remaining
2.9 total.
fund, free cash was 1.6 after you used 1.3.
Correct.
We just voted to carry, of that 1.6, the 500 over.
That's
Not used.
I was
I'm sorry.
holding out the OPEB figure as it's going to be an additional discussion. So that should be part of this discussion.
Oh,
The OPEB
Okay.
discussion should be a discussion on itself. The only figure I was saying we had committed, which we really have committed, $800,000 to the
Yes,
operating budget,
right.
which is something we've done for a number of years.
Right.
And right now, we voted to keep 500 in. We haven't dealt with the OPEB figure yet. Should we do that next?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Let's do the OPEB figure next.
Can I clarify one thing on that?
Yep.
Is the OPEB is now in at 500,000?
Correct.
Correct. So if we reduced it, we would save an additional X. Yes. Correct?
Correct.
We would narrow the gap by
Narrow the gap.
by that.
I mean, I would like us to consider, I'm building off the conversation last week, we all know this is a token amount. In other words, nothing, I mean, we'd have to get in millions and millions and millions to come close to funding our obligation. We're one of a very small handful of communities who are doing anything, any funding whatsoever. So I think if we, and we took, a very strong first step, at least symbolically, with the 500,000. So I'd make a suggestion that we think about 100,000 for '09.
Yeah, good.
And that would still separate us from the masses, so to speak, in terms of contributing, the 351 cities and towns, we'd probably be in a group of fewer than 10 making any contribution in 2009. So at least put that on for discussion.
Okay. Ralph? and
I don't
then
mind
Bill.
cut from 500, but I sort of liked the ideas that Floyd was laying out in an email, which suggested that we ought to have an OPEB policy. Now, that policy might end up yielding 100,000, but I think if it's put in the framework of a policy that we will spend this much and we will do it year after year after year, it's going to give most rating agencies a much better feeling about us because we've actually adopted a policy, just like we've adopted the reserve policy. So I don't remember.
What was the outcome of your policy?
You have
Right. And what is the concrete benefit?
You want me to spend a minute talking?
Please.
Please do.
Would you come to the tables, because I think it'll be clearer?
I'll make the approach. Come right here. No, all the way in the front, so.
They got a spot right here for you, Floyd.
Yeah. Mr. Treasurer.
Yes. I circulated a memo to Mike, Ralph, Roby, the fourth person, I forget who the fourth one was, but at any rate, was just throwing some ideas out about a OPEB policy. And I started out by saying that we ought to consider 10% of our free cash less any earmarks for the following year. So as an example, we had $2.9 million of free cash. We already earmarked $800,000 for the next year's budget. So in my mind, your free cash is really only $2.1 million. So take 10% of that generate $210,000. Then I thought, if you looked at the OPEB allocation as far as the liability, get a percentage between the town, water, sewer, public safety. We have, within our accounting system, the water and sewer enterprise funds. Maybe those enterprise funds, which are standalone entities, could pay a small portion into the OPEB fund. And I did a quick calculation, and it came up to be about $20,000. So now I was up to roughly $230,000 to fund the OPEB. Then I threw on the table that maybe we ought to look at our, what I call our post-healthcare savings, the money that we're setting aside, self-funding on our own, and maybe take 25% of the interest earnings in a given year and use that. I don't know how much we have in Medicare Part D. These are town employees that eventually hit 65, and we start getting some reimbursements on Medicare Part D, and it's probably nickels and dimes. Then finally, any non-contributory pension dollars upon retirees passing away, we could use a little bit of that money. Then ultimately, when we get the pension fund paid up sometime in 2026, we'll just divert that money into the OPEB. I mean, that's, we're talking many, many years away. But, the initial thrust of this was to have some fixed numbers that really revolved around a reserve fund and the two enterprise funds that we have. That was the gist of it.
Okay, Mike, go ahead.
As a starting point, we just agreed to take more out of the free cash, or would you start at a lower amount? In other words, isn't the decision we just made?
The free cash was $2.9 million, and then we're moving $800,000.
But now we're going to use more of it, so shouldn't we start at a lower number?
Yeah, that's another earmark.
Yeah. Yes, it is.
It's really the language you're going to use in your policy. So if you've decided that in a given year, you get a certified free cash number, and then as a committee is saying so much is going to be used for the following year, that's going to reduce the available free cash you have in that year. So, yeah, that would be a starting point, absolutely. Good, Walter.
So it's 160, yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Mark, and then Walter.
Floyd, have you had discussions with the rating agencies on this matter? I mean, if we're only one of five towns, Mike?
It's small.
Handful, and I think Roy said last week, or it's a token amount, and we could never, it's impossible, I think your words, that we would ever be able to fund this liability. I mean, what is the sense from the rating agencies about this matter?
They bring it up every time we talk to them. They ask, is the town got a policy? And, I keep saying, we're working on it. Last year was an easier discussion because I could point to that we put $500,000 in.
But you could have a policy that says, here's our policy, but we decide to fund it $10 a year. I mean, the policy needs to be somewhat substantive too, I would imagine, correct?
And I think that's what you've tried to outline.
That's what I tried to outline.
So this is generally an approach in terms of putting some substance together with the policy. Okay.
Floyd, I think you're approaching it backwards. You're approaching it from, this is how much money we got, and we're going to put a portion of it in. If we're trying to solve a problem and we have this much of a liability, shouldn't the amount we put in be some function of the amount of the liability rather than the assets that we have kicking around?
The current liability, based on a 2006 actuarial study, is $121 million.
So 1% or 0.5% or something, I mean, it would just seem that you should be looking towards what your liability is rather than looking towards your assets.
What I was trying to do was to come up with a policy that the town could live with. And as time goes on, you can tweak that policy, but I think you need to start out with something.
Yeah, but I think Walter's just I think Walter's agreeing with you, but saying, offering a different approach, which is saying as a percent of the liability, rather than a percent of the amount.
Of the assets that
of
we
the
have.
assets. So he's coming at it differently, but I think we're batting around different ways to approach the
The
policy.
percentage looks better doing it.
Well, 0.5% is 600 grand, I mean, so.
Yeah.
I mean, the percent gets so small
That's
that we
the
keep
problem.
calling the attention how big the liability is.
Yeah, yeah,
know,
right.
it's-
It's- Bill, you're conceptually right, but conceptually wrong.
The whole issue, but I agree with what Mike was saying, but it just troubles me that we've got
So we're getting A in
that
economics.
much liability out there. And I know we're supposed to have our unfunded pension liabilities taken care of by 2026, but we're not making much progress on that. And when we look at comparable towns, we're on the low side on where we're funding that when you look at Wellesley and some of these other towns that are 100% funded. So I get a little nervous about not meeting our obligations. And the unfunded pension thing, I'm not sure, we'll get the new actuarial study. I'm not sure we want to make 2026 based on where we're going with it right now, because we're going backwards on the percentage that we're funded, not gaining ground on it. So I think that we need to stop kidding ourselves on some of these unfunded liabilities that we don't think we're going to have to deal with. But the pension bothers me because we're not gaining on that, we're losing on it.
Mike?
The real issue that the funding discussion raises is we need to address the retiree medical benefits.
Yeah.
I mean, the fact of the matter is that with the exception of maybe a small handful, if that, of the communities in Massachusetts, no community, including Belmont, can afford the present level of benefits. Afford in the sense that we can't pay for them. I mean, there's no scenario, hence my word impossible, there is no scenario under which we can pay for these benefits. So the sooner we recognize that and put a plan together that, yes, meets our responsibilities to retirees, but begins to curtail the expenditures for retiree medical care, that'll send a heck of a message to the rating agencies, and that's the only way we're ever going to address this issue. Otherwise, we're just pretending here, coming up with a little Band-Aid, but we can't fund it because we're promising more than we can pay for, and that's...
But Mike, we're in the same situation with the pension as well. There's got to be both the retiree health and the pension. Because
Yeah.
we can't afford 80% of people's last 3 years' salary. There's no other pension program out there that any company you know of that does it.
Right.
That's all gone. So it's a twofold issue. It's both the health insurance and the pension, I think.
Defined benefits are gone.
Yeah.
John?
A question on your comments. Who would drive that? The selectmen, the Warrant Committee, county?
Well, we've had some discussions about it in terms of the follow-up to the changes through the collective bargaining. I mean, selectmen would, you know, the Warrant Committee is part of the process, but the selectmen would take the lead.
Peg?
I'm just not totally comfortable
And-
with taking an amount that's token and then making it a further token. I mean, it's not a whole lot of money in the big picture, I understand that. The 100,000 is what I'm talking about. I'd like to see it a little more than 100,000.
I mean, I'm driven by the fact that we need to close a budget. That's right. And this is funny money anyway, in all truth. It's really funny money. I mean, it's an absurd, the whole thing is an absurd proposition because we can't pay for it. So why should we try?
Well, it's,
I mean, we can't, and that's the reality.
You sound like a congressman.
No, it's the reality. It's the
Roy and then Ralph.
Yeah, based on the discussion we had last week, if to fund the post-employment health fully would require 10 million a year or more, 11 million a year, even at $500,000, it means you would take 20 years to fund each year.
Correct.
So it's so far off, it's less than token, it's less than de minimis. And
some change.
yeah, and
right.
that's why I asked last week what happens to the money when it's contributed, and it sounds like it goes into a trust and you don't see it again. But it's a trust that's never going to make anybody whole because it will never amount to enough to satisfy even a tiny fraction of the obligation. So it seems if the rating agencies are taken in by something like this, it's kind of a sad statement as to the rating agencies, I think, because this is effectively punting on the whole obligation if you're only paying in at that rate.
Wait a minute. Ralph,
Yeah.
Liz, Bill, and then Angela.
I'm not sure that's necessarily true. There was the last line in his statement was, after the pension is fully funded, then the same amounts that are going into that pension fund would start going into this fund. And that's what Wellesley is doing, and they're putting in substantially more. And if you're at the same time doing what Mike has recommended, which is the only solution, that's cutting the benefits back, there may be some point at which this becomes a reasonable fund for a reasonable, payable, affordable solution. I mean, that's way out for 2050, but, you know, I think that's something that I think could sell to a rating agency and be fairly realistic, noting explicitly that we're doing the other part too. We're trying to cut the benefits.
Right. Liz?
Just to repeat the discussion, first to second one, I think it is much better to have some policy than to have pulled a number out of the air. I think that seems to me pretty clearly true. And second, we are looking forward to some bonding, some very big bond issues relative to what we have bonded in the past. So thinking about how do you absolutely maintain a AAA rating going forward is a very important thing to think about. So, and that's not, I mean, and to the extent there, for the arguments that were made last week, to the extent that says you're looking at the numbers, you're thinking about this, it's a very important time to keep the AAA rating.
A question for Floyd, another comment. Floyd, I gather what you're telling us is you think it's important for rating agencies, et cetera, that we have a policy,
Yes.
whether it's based on what you're talking about,
Right.
Walter, or somebody else. And I think, Pat, we probably ought to come up with fairly soon some kind of a formalized policy, whether it's Floyd's or some offshoot of that, or Walter. I really think we ought to do that. And I think the other issue on making a contribution is important for the current town employees, to let them know that we're at least cognizant of this, because if you're an employee that's about ready to retire and you're hearing that the Warrant Committee is not willing to fund their health insurance in retirement, that's not a message we want to be delivering to town employees. So I think some amount, even if it's the total.
We are funding it. We're funding it on a pay-as-you-go basis. So we're funding their retirement. This is the future unfunded
The future
obligation.
unfunded obligation, and who knows what that is. And we're getting more and more retirees from the town, and they're all living longer. So we're going to be paying for health insurance a whole lot longer the people retiring now, in all probability, than the people who retired 10 and 20 years ago.
Which is why we have to address the issue.
That's right. I totally agree
That's why
with
we
you.
have what we do.
We can't lose sight of the fact that we have in fact taken a big dent out of that liability just by virtue of the fact that we changed the contributory
Yes.
payment from, so we've reduced that liability by a minimum of 10% right off the bat.
Yep.
Okay?
It's still a number
Which is
that
a
we'll
heck of a
never
lot
see.
more money than the $500,000 that we threw into it. Okay? We've reduced it by at least $10 million. All right? That's point number one. The second part of that is that liability is going to change as a result of plan design changes, which for the most part have already been negotiated and are going to be implemented. All right, and going to be implemented at some point, whether it's the end of February, whether it's the beginning of March or whatever, but that's going to happen within a relatively short period of time. So that's another way that we address that. The third way that we address it, this is a question, Barbara, and I'm not sure what the answer to it is. When we looked at that unfunded liability, was the assumption made that we were going to continue to be hiring people and putting them on the same benefit plan that the existing people are on? In other words, if we changed all those benefits today, I'm not suggesting that we do, but if we shut off all those benefits today, and we were forced to fund the obligations that we already had, that number would be substantially less than 120 million.
Correct.
Okay, that's assuming that we continue going forward at the same rate. So maybe another way, if we're trying to satisfy the rating agencies, we've already taken two giant steps by changing that, by changing the health plan. Another way of looking at that is starting to evaluate how we start to move in the direction that Mike is talking about, and that is saying, okay, look, you've got a commitment to existing employees, but new employees, as they come on board, okay, we can't continue these existing benefit rates. I know those are subjects for negotiation, but we ought to start thinking about that and putting a plan like that in motion, and that's another way that we can make a significant dent in that obligation. So I think having said all of that, I'm leaning toward the 100,000. I agree there ought to be a policy, but I think we ought to design the policy that comes up with $100,000.
Let me move Ralph and then Roy.
Let's not assume that we're going to knock 10 million off a $121 million obligation. That was 2 years old. we did a quick re-estimate last year. It had grown, hadn't it, substantially?
Yes.
So we might have knocked 10 million off 140 million. But the fact that these benefits are continuing to be paid out, and more people are retiring, and health costs are going up, continues to drive that number up.
We would have knocked 14 million off 140.
Right.
What I'm saying is, we want to sit here and like that number is going down. I don't think that's going to be the case until we really make some changes, because there's...
I agree that the real a policy with real effect would be changing the plan designs, and I think the advantage of a contribution on the kind of low end of the scale, whether 200 or whatever, I think it might be more important actually to fix it so that nobody's under the illusion that that number will ever become, and that will possibly increase the incentive to actually the plan design to make the whole thing feasible.
Mike?
I'll make a motion based on this conversation, and obviously I think part of the motion is that we will work on policy. We're not going to develop it tonight. But for planning purposes, for the budget exercise, that we make a contribution of $150,000 for and then at our leisure, if you will, we can develop a policy.
Second.
Okay, is there any further discussion, John?
Since this is, 150 is still a token amount, not make any difference, 100 huge difference, or a fairly large difference in the operating budget. So I would tend to go with 0 rather than 150.
Move the question.
Okay. Vote on moving the question. All in favor of moving the question?
Aye.
Is anyone opposed to moving the question?
Yeah. I want to say.
Two people, wait a minute.
It's defeated.
Let me take, okay, it's defeated. All right. So we're not,
It's
we
approved.
moved the question. All right, but
it's
we're
passed.
back to discussion, so you can still hear what Floyd had to say.
No, he moved the question, so now we have to
you're
vote on
right.
the motion.
Sorry. Okay. The motion is $150,000.
And development of a policy.
And the development of a policy. Could we ask the treasurer and the Board of Selectmen to create a policy? I'm not sure the Warrant Committee should be creating policy. We can recommend that a policy be created.
After the note, we'll
Would that
take
be
a look at
okay?
that, yes.
Okay. So,
And I'm asking Tom and
Do you have
Floyd
a
to
motion?
work together to develop the policy.
It's $150K for '09 and a later time develop policy? Or discuss developing a policy?
I'm not
In the
really
next
at a
week,
later
in the next
time.
few weeks.
In the next few weeks. We should be
At a later
developing a
time.
policy in this budget season.
Yeah, and develop a policy within this budget.
Within this budget season, yes.
Yeah, that was the intent.
Okay, that was the intent. Okay. All in favor of that, please raise your hand or say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? One opposed.
Okay, another 50.
Yeah.